Hello and welcome to Through Dangers Untold, Chapter 10, Helpful Hands, or Helping Hands should I say. I'm your host always, Elwood Jones, and joining me of course is my glamorous co-host, Miss Emily Slade.
That's me.
And because we are talking about the Helping Hands, we've brought in some help of our own as we get to introduce the Lamb's very own master of puppets. It's Mr. Todd Liebenow.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us, Todd. And obviously, as we like to ask everyone when they come on, when it comes to Labyrinth, other than your much documented love of Jennifer Connelly, what is the lasting appeal to you of Labyrinth?
Oh, well, there's lots of things. I've said this many times that I think Labyrinth is a movie that was made because someone plugged some wires in my brain and just came up with something that I would like. Because it's got so many different components that were important to me in my teenage years. It's done by Jim Henson, and of course I have a huge interest in puppetry. Produced by George Lucas, who's basically the guy that turned me into a movie fan because I went nuts over Star Wars when I was 6. Written by Terry Jones. I loved Monty Python in my high school years. At the time that this movie came out, I was religiously watching Monty Python's Flying Circus, which aired on our local PBS channel late nights on Sunday nights. And so, all those three things had me hooked. And then I went to the theater and saw Jennifer Connelly walk on the screen, and I had my biggest teenage crush ever. So, this movie has everything for me.
Yeah, it's either Jennifer Connelly or Phoebe Cates are the two that everyone seems to have when it comes to 80s cinema. So
Yeah, they were like the it girls of the 80s, weren't they?
it's her and Molly Ringwald.
Molly
Ringwald, the
Ringwald.
Brat Pack. And Ali Sheedy I'd throw in there as well.
Yeah.
I make no bones about it. I was a lonely, awkward kid. I had crushes on lots of these celebrity actresses. Elizabeth Shue, Leah Thompson, all of them. So.
There's definitely a running look between them when you sort of list out who the sort of the it girls of this era. They've got that sort of popular girl edge to them, but at the same time they're kind of the girl next door.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
They chose Jennifer Connelly for Labyrinth because they said she balanced that perfect line between girlhood and womanhood, and I think they all sort of do that. And a lot of the women we mentioned were in running for Sarah, so yeah, I think it's something that they were looking for in the perfect leading lady of the time, I guess, to appeal to the main demographic of cinema goers, which was the teenage boy.
Hey, I went to the theater every weekend back then in the 80s. Whatever was new, I was seeing it. I saw Labyrinth on opening day, the very first show at the Stratford Square Mall.
So jealous. So jealous.
And do you have a favourite year of the 80s? I know everyone tends to lean towards 83 or 87, so I don't know if you had being obviously a child of the 80s.
Yeah, my year is 84. 84 is the big movie year for me. I always kind of say it was, that was the movie that pushed me beyond Star Wars and turned me into a bigger movie fan. Because, before that, it was all about Star Wars. And, so 83 had Return of the Jedi. And so after that, it was like, what? There's no more Star Wars? What do you mean? And then came 1984, and just so many iconic movies of the 80s are 84. I mean, that's the year of Ghostbusters and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, The Karate Kid, Gremlins, The Terminator, This is Spinal Tap, Purple Rain, A Nightmare on Elm Street. I could just keep going and going and going. There's so many iconic movies from 84. So that's the year that I always look to as my favorite of the decade.
Oh, definitely. So I know at the start of lockdown we had a film-for-film trade-off where I was pitting 99 against your 84. And I think it got to the point where we were like 2 days in where someone came on and was like, are you still going at this?
Yes, I remember that. It seems like forever ago now. Oh, my gosh.
But that was such a great way to waste those 2 days of just like, when we were back on prison time when you got your hour of outdoor time, so...
I was out of work. I had nothing better to do, so
and amuse me on the internet. But yeah, I appreciated that. But obviously in our breakdown Labyrinth, we are tonight looking at Helping Hands, another iconic moment within the film. And I think when you look at the film, really from Magic Dance is the sort of stepping off point, and it's just iconic moment after iconic moment. Last episode, we obviously looked at the Four Guards. another great piece of Monty Python-esque trade-off there, and obviously Sarah's choice has now landed her leading down the chasm of the helping hands, and this is a scene which is a really simple effect, but when you watch this as a child, you think that it's just one person's hands and don't realize it's four people's hands, and you will probably end up doing some real mischief to your hands, like I did, trying to replicate some of these hand faces. But yeah, Todd, I mean, this was obviously one of the big scenes that you wanted to talk about. What is the lasting appeal of Helping Hands?
Well, I think it is one of the scenes I most remember from the movie, and it's one that when they were in the early stages of promoting this, and we first started to see some of the trailers come out and some of the promotional materials, I remember them bringing this out because it was such a unique moment. And as someone who was very into Jim Henson stuff, very into the art of puppetry myself, I'd look at this and just go, "Oh my gosh, that's really clever. That's incredible what they're doing there." So yeah, this was kind of that moment of the movie that when I went and saw it for the first time, I was waiting for it because I'd heard about this thing where the hands come to life.
Okay. It's interesting that this was the scene that they chose to use as promotion. Like, we have Bowie, we have a gorgeous Jennifer Connelly, we've got wall-to-wall puppets, and we're going to have the scene, probably the one scene without puppets in, to use as promotional material. and I kind of understand it. It's obviously got that fantastical sense to it. Emily, what do you sort of think about the Helping Hands? Because I think this is a scene you said you liked as well. So.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan. When I first saw it, it really captured something in my imagination. I was so like blown away. I mean, I'm blown away every single scene in Labyrinth with the just majesty of the creativity that's thrown at you. And this was a really great example. I mean, what a wonderful sequence of events to go from the guards to the Helping Hands and then to one of my absolute favorite scenes, the oubliette, where and I remember seeing the behind the scenes footage of the hands as Jim Henson was talking over and saying like, yeah, we put Jennifer in these really dangerous situations that we only realize now are dangerous looking back on them. And that really like stayed with me, where I was like, that's so cool. Like, this young woman who's my age when I was first watching Labyrinth is being like tossed around this movie set and put in all of these like cool stunt positions that, you know, obviously it's not comparable to like whatever the fuck Tom Cruise was doing over on Mission Impossible or whatever, but it felt like it was. Do you know what I mean? Like, it was so badass to me that like I'm not quite sure how they did it, because I never really want to fully break the magic, but in my head these actors are genuinely like holding Jennifer Connelly up, which I'm sure is not the case, but and she's just, so it must kind of hurt being in that sort of tunnel of hands and then having to like maneuver herself to face them every time she talks to them. Like, the whole thing is just so cool, and like everything with Labyrinth, there's so many levels to it, from what you're seeing on the screen to then how they did it in real life, and it's just a great scene.
Yeah, I have no idea how they shot this, so I can't help you out there at all.
Well,
you want to help ruin the movie magic there, Todd?
Well, I don't want to ruin things too much for
but I'll close my ears. La la la.
There is some interesting footage they have of this. I think the DVD that I have at least has a documentary, and there's quite a section about the Helping Hands. And like I said, they did kind of pull this out and show some of the stuff as they were promoting it and such. But yeah, as I look at it, I go, wow, that does really look dangerous what they're doing here, because they had like a 40-foot tall shaft that, you know, had all these hands and such, and you know, she's attached to some wires and such so that they can lower her down safely and you know, relatively safely, or, you know, I mean, make it slow and safe and all that kind of stuff. But it's still her. You know, it's 15-year-old Jennifer Connelly 40 feet off the ground, and with all this stuff, you know, that's all over the place. I'm sure there were a lot of things to consider, just, you know, with all the different things that were in the way of the wires and such. As you watch that behind the scenes footage, you go, yeah, if I were her parent, I'd be sitting there going, oh my gosh, I can't believe what I'm letting my kid do here, you know.
Yeah. Something I especially love about how the way the scene's shot is that every time that she stops and she's held by the hands, she's not in like a perfectly framed position. You see there's one particular shot where her legs just slightly lifted, and it does give the impression that she's just like been suddenly stopped at this moment, and especially when you consider it's just a bunch of hands holding her, she wouldn't just have like this perfectly framed fall. She's basically being tossed down the hole by the hands, and the fact that they're choosing whether she goes up or down.
Well, she's choosing, and I find that so fun as well, because another reason why Labyrinth is one of the best movies ever made is because it's tinged with this real darkness, much like all of the sort of 80s kids movies at the time. And The Helping Hands really has it here, where she's fallen down this hole, she's caught by them. They give her the choice where they're like up or down. And she's like, very logically and very sensibly, I guess as I'm pointed that way, I'll go down. And then like something snaps and it suddenly becomes so ominous where it's like, she chose down. She chose down. Was that wrong? Too late now. And you're like, oh, fuck. Like, where is she going? Like, is this now sudden death? Like, it's really fun. It's really engaging to watch. Both as a teenager and as an adult, of that just sort of like, oh, you did it again. Same with the like, I should have kept on going that way. Should have gone straight to that castle. So many moments like that where you're like, oh, gotcha.
I always struggled with the choice she made, though. I mean, even in that split second before the first one, kind of goes, she chose down. The first time watching it, I was like, no, go up.
Yeah.
You know what's up there already. It's a bottomless pit the other way. I wouldn't have chose down.
And I guess, in the back of her mind, maybe she's got she's seen the poster for the movie that she's in, and where it's like nothing is as it seems. So she's like, maybe down is safe. Maybe down is like the ground at least, and then I can get my bearings. Whereas up would be, I guess it'd just be kind of anticlimactic and awkward. Like, I would feel awkward asking for them to take me up. I wouldn't feel comfortable asking these helping hands. I'd be like, yeah, okay, I guess let's go up. And then they'd be like, oh. And then they have to like kind of push you, and they're like, oh shit, do you have an ankle? Like, ow. Okay, yeah, keep going. And Jennifer Connelly's like, oh god, I'm so sorry. I just really don't want to go. Yeah, if you could just okay, yeah. And it would just be so long, and it would be like most of the movie of her like crawling out of this helping hands tunnel. So I don't know.
Well, you bring up an interesting point there, which is something that I've always kind of struggled with on this scene, is that just watching it, it's a little bit uncomfortable just because I'm going, here we have this very attractive teenage girl, and there's all these hands all over her. And I'm thinking, if I was one of the puppeteers, I'd be afraid that I'd do something wrong. Let's just put it that way, because you can't see what you're doing,
If you were filming in 2021, you'd be hyper aware of that. I think filming in the 80s, who's to say, but I know what you mean. I'd like to think that they would be aware that that's potentially going to happen, and everyone would be briefed and just sort of like, don't take the piss, and like, let's all just try and do this safely. But then also it wouldn't have been at the forefront of everyone's mind. The Me Too movement hadn't happened. They're not going to be like worried that Jennifer Connelly is going to get hurt or anything in that way.
I think also when you look at the positions of the hands, they're in the sort of positions where they are around her, basically at the sides of her arms, and they are a fair distance, because it's sort of the lower portion of her arms that they're holding. And I imagine that when they shot this, are going to have people with their hands out where you drop somebody, because that's going to hurt like nobody's business. So they probably like lowered it down. You put the hands in, and then we shoot the scene, and we do what we need to do, and then we can like lower her down again or raise her up. I don't know what they were doing with her, but yeah.
Well, some of the hands are real, with puppeteers, operating them, and some of them are just flopping there. I mean, if you really watch it slowly and stuff, you can start to pick out, which ones actually have performers inside them. But yeah, I mean, I was thinking about, one of the things that the Muppet performers always do is they've got monitors and stuff so they can watch and see what they're doing. But in a sequence like this, where I'm sure there were, a dozen or so at least, and probably more puppeteers in there, all around this big 40-foot tall shaft. And, I mean, I'm sure there weren't enough monitors to go around. I'm sure that some of them were performing completely blind.
Yeah, I just love as well the fact that all the helping hands are all very British. I know we're obviously shooting it Pinewood, but it's a very British tunnel.
I guess it's that sort
I
of
was thinking
vibe of when you do a silly voice, you go British.
Okay.
Well, I was thinking they sound a lot like Monty Python characters, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Which again, you got the Terry Jones influence there. And I guess my understanding is this was a scene too that was really kind of Terry Jones's brainchild, where he came up with this idea of, it'd be cool if there were these hands, and then they started talking to her. He kind of imagined it like there was this ventriloquist called Senior Wences who used to have a puppet that was basically just his hand wearing a wig, and he kind of pitched this idea, and then Henson and his crew turned it into something completely different and all that. But I always, as I watch the scene and those voices, I go, yeah, it sounds like John Cleese and Graham Chapman and folks like that doing the voices, so.
Yeah, no, definitely. I also really get a sort of Jean Cocteau, La Belle et la Bête vibe as well. When she's going down the corridor and all of the hands in the wall are like pulling out the chandeliers and stuff. It's very iconic. It's then reused in like Legend and Phantom of the Opera. So then, almost tying back into your other point about the safety and stuff, like, does it also reflect the labyrinth and its danger as a Jareth's omnipotent presence, where it's like he can see everything, he can feel everything, there are eyes in the walls, there are hands in the walls. It's not safe, and it's definitely not safe for Sarah. And then it's that juxtaposition of the silly Monty Python voices with these quite dangerous servants of Jareth almost.
Yeah.
It kind of brings us way back to chapter 6, Left or Right, and we have the eyes in the wall, and it's the labyrinth is a living, breathing thing, and the helping hands are very much another entity of this, although Sarah's encounter with them is just really a series of just bad decisions on her part. I mean, she takes the wrong path offered by the worm, so she could have gone straight to the castle, but instead goes deeper into the labyrinth. She chooses the wrong door with the 4 guards, and now with the helping hand, she chooses the wrong path for them, and we keep seeing her make wrong choice after wrong choice, and really until she meets with the wise man and she starts to get a few right. And it's almost like she learns what she's supposed to be doing in the labyrinth, because up until this point, she's essentially just Forrest Gumping her way through this, or being bailed out by Hoggle, who just seems to be lumbered in to her quest for whatever reason. I don't know what he's done wrong, but...
Well, he done right.
You talk about her making wrong choice after wrong choice, and I keep thinking, I don't know if there is a right choice in this scene. I
would agree.
If she went up, we should probably have something just as bad waiting for
her. Yeah.
Have a cup of tea with the worm. That's a great choice.
Yeah.
It doesn't help you getting your brother back, but again,
it's funny,
it's another British response, isn't it, to something faced with a problem?
I think she's set up to fail as best she can. Not to skip ahead too much, but Jareth's about to talk about how the fact that she shouldn't even have gotten to where she currently is, because she should have given up by now, because the labyrinth is set against her. So, the doors, was it the wrong door, or did both doors lead to sudden death? Or did the other door lead to the gaping wide mouth of a monster? We don't know, and we'll never know. Or did the 2 doors lead to the same place? We don't know. So I think there's no such thing as a right or wrong decision. There's just the labyrinth, and you just have to keep going, I guess, is the moral of that story. Much like the ongoing inescapable march of puberty and death, which is also what this movie's about.
when it comes to the helping hands, I mean, obviously, when you look at this idea that, you know, the hands are talking, that could be done very simply, but what we see here instead is quite magical in a way. The fact you have multiple hands come together and they form these really complex faces. We see, like, a fist becomes a nose, and then two hands either side become, like, the mustache. And the way that these hands move, it's how someone would actually talk. I just love the amount of detail they put into it, much like anything Henson does with the way when you look at how these puppets like talk. And we've mentioned before about how they like have those little reactions when they are listening for it to say the right words, and they hit that little gasp when you see their eyes grow wider. And it's the same with the helping hands, just like the level of detail. And you're just looking at people's hands that have been painted green, but what 5 hands together can just create in our mind is just absolutely extraordinary. Even now, even in these days we're all like old and jaded, it still has that magic to it.
Yeah, well, they put a lot of work into coming up with a variety of different faces. I remember when I first heard the idea, I thought, okay, well, you know, how many faces can you do out of some hands? Well, they could do an awful lot. There's a lot of interesting things they come up with. And again, as you look at the behind the scenes stuff, there's a lot that didn't show up in the final film. You see them playing with things and making some faces that look pretty cool that they didn't actually end up using in the film. But I love the way that the faces all kind of, you know, have this recognizable aspect, but then also are somewhat grotesque as well. I mean, it just kind of plays into that theme of the whole scene where they're, you know, it's all, you know, kind of gradually gets more dark and sinister as it goes. And just the look of these hands in general. I mean, there is a bit more to it than just the hands. They're wearing, you know, these are latex so that they're a little bit bigger than a natural hand. And I've found that actually helps this scene. Every puppeteer friend of mine, when they saw this scene, was like, ooh, we need to try that. And I've seen many performers try to do their own version of it, and it doesn't work as well because, number one, they're not wearing these large latex hands like they are in this scene, and secondly, most of the performers I know that are using it are trying to do it in a stage setting, and it's too distant on a stage setting. This is something that really benefits from being up close in the camera. But yeah, I mean, it's one of the most creative bits of puppetry I think, you know, that Henson ever did. I mean, it's such a simple concept, but in true Henson form, they just take it to an extreme that, you know, his creative mind was just the perfect thing to do that, you know.
It really is. It's almost like something that you'd come up with your sort of theatre troupe at like university, where it's like, go and devise something, and they're like, oh, what if we like put our hands together and make faces through the wall or whatever. Like, it's so simple and it seems so obvious, but it's so magical when put in the hands of Jim Henson.
Is this something you tried in theatre school, Emily?
We try everything.
It seemed a very specific like story to tell that, so
it just, having done a lot of devising, it's very much like the kind of bullshit that you'll pull out at like fucking 9 o'clock at night in the rehearsal room, and you're just like, oh god, I don't know, what if we did this? Kind of thing. And then you try it and you do it and you're like, actually that's a great idea, and then you have another Red Bull and then you like do some more stuff. But it feels so professional and it feels so legitimate here from such a simple idea that's probably been tried and failed across the country over several years.
Well, I have tried it in puppetry workshops, and it's tough.
Yeah.
You know, you're having to twist your arms in you know, odd positions to get the angle right, because the way that your hands, you know, like if the back side of your hand is not what works well for this. It's the front side that gets a better image trying to do a mouth or things like that. So you're having to turn other directions or do one half of a mouth and another puppeteer do the other half of a mouth. And it's awkward and difficult. You're trying to make, you know, 3 different brains here, make it look like one as you're creating this character. So yeah, this is not easy stuff. It's a simple looking concept, but it's very difficult from a puppetry standpoint.
Yeah, I always was obsessed with the crab face that you see right at the end.
Yes.
It's got the beady eyes. And the amount of time I'd like spent like contorting my hands to like make the little beady eyes because I was sure it's one hand. And I think between that and numerous skateboard injuries, it's why my hands are so screwed up now. So, but yeah,
My favourite's the one with the moustache.
Mine too.
Because the hands rise and forwards. I like the one which has got the bulbous boxer's nose as well. And it's like, come on, It's not a difficult decision. Because everyone's apparently lives in the 18th century in this tunnel. They're not all just British, they're all like Dickensian characters, so...
Yeah.
And I love how sort of drawn out the dialogue is to make sure we get to see as many hands as possible. So it's like, which way do you want to go? Yes, which way?
That's one of the things about the scene that's bugged me a little bit because, you watched it and it's clear that they put extra little lines in there so that they could do more faces. And also, the delivery of them is a bit more slow and deliberate. And I'm sure that's because, like I said, the puppetry was really difficult. It's tough to do this type of lip sync. So they had to talk in a little bit more drawn out and deliberate way. It bugs me a little, but not enough to not like the scene. So.
To override it.
It's funny you mentioned it and looking at it from that technical standpoint, because whenever I watched it, I assumed because, it's this ethereal sort of being, the voice is like being drawn out of the ether, that's why it's got that sort of delay and why the movements are the way that they are.
Like
but
it needs to find a host before it can say its next
yeah
thing,
exactly,
like a hive mind that spits ventriloquism out.
I think
that's an interesting concept you just brought up there, El, when you called it a being, and I thought, okay, so is the shaft of hands several creatures, or is it one creature?
I look at the problem is that being from some of the childhood trauma I got from like 80s cinema and stuff. I look at this tunnel and then I get flashbacks to the Time Masters and those big tentacle things that come down from the ceiling and snatch that delightful creature up, and it's like, oh no. And then I remind myself, it's like they're just hands, happy place.
Hands with hands. Which took me a few viewings. It wasn't until a few years ago, and bearing in mind I've been watching this every day since I was 13, it was only a few years ago that I actually clocked that one of the later hands, when it says she chose down, has like two hands pointing down either side of it, and then another one afterwards as well has a similar thing, and it like all of a sudden I was watching it and I was like, oh, it has hands. As hands.
I think there's a couple of them that have that, and I took note of that today as I was rewatching the scene as well, and I thought, you know what? I think watching this so many times in pan and scan, on VHS in the 80s, I think a lot of those hands off to the side that are gesturing along with the faces were cut out of the scene in the the non-widescreen version. So. Yeah, yay, Letterboxd.
Exactly. And they've got, I also like when they, she chooses down, they just suddenly turn into gremlins. Because I think everyone wanted their gremlins moment to the 80s. I think when Gremlins came out, there were so many films that tried to, have their gremlins moment. You had, films like Ghoulies, which had crammed in this cheap-looking puppet because, Gremlins made money. And you had Garbage Pail Kids. And anything that could, emulate a gremlin, they were like, yeah, cram it in. Get some of that gremlin money. And you see it with the way they shut the trapdoor, and it's like, hey! And it's like, why do they care the door's closed? She's not climbing back up there.
It's for dramatic effect, And besides, they got hands. They need a chance to slam a door. So, it makes their lives interesting.
I mean, what do they do when they haven't got people wandering into their shaft? I mean, do they just sit there and talk to themselves, or...
They play rock, paper, scissors, things like that.
So, now I just want to see that scene.
They get their knitting out, they have a cup of tea.
Yeah.
And you go back and it's like, oh yeah, totally.
Like no one visits the Labyrinth, so it's been like 100 years since they were last used as their thing, which is why they're so overly enthusiastic here. And they drop everything to catch her, and then they're like, oh, which way do you want to go? Yes, which way? Everyone wants to look in.
How many years has it been? You have to wonder. It's not like every day they pluck some kid out to go through the labyrinth. Yeah.
And I can't imagine many humans have gone through the labyrinth before either. Like, we'll talk about the sort of warning stones later on, where they haven't said it in such a long time. But, like, where is the labyrinth? And, like, what unfortunate creature stumbles upon it often, if at all? And, you know, or is it just humans that only visit there? Because I can imagine, like, little creatures from nearby, like, fantasy neighborhoods must wander in by accident and then be like, shit, and end up having to, like, deal with all of these stupid creatures, and they're like, please can I just go home? And they're like, which way do you want to go?
So what, like the fawn from Pans, and Jared holds like a Labyrinth open day, sort of like where like Labyrinth owners from around the kingdom can come together and trade stories and hold workshops on getting the most out of your goblin labour and ferry control, that sort of thing. So
Jareth could promote the place as an escape room and make tons of money.
He could.
Yes. Oh my god. Basically, take my money, give me a Labyrinth escape room. Why isn't that a thing? Give me a Labyrinth-themed escape room.
We've already like covered on a previous episode that the Labyrinth isn't the best magical kingdom to live in. I think we decided Legend was going to be the best kingdom to live in.
For sure.
Todd, have you got any preferred magical kingdoms you want to live in? Like Krull or...
Oh my goodness.
Never.
Magical kingdom to live in. I don't know. I mean, Oz seems pretty sweet. I mean, you know, once you get rid of the Wicked Witches and stuff, you know, it's not too shabby.
Movie Oz. I wouldn't want to live in Book Oz.
Well, Book Oz is like all over the place. I love the Oz books. I went through them with my daughter when she was really young, and I think they're a lot of fun. But it's interesting to read like the Oz books and then read like Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings, because those ones you go, well, this author had a plan. L. Frank Baum had no plan. You know, he just whenever the ideas came up, he's like, well, this sounds good. You know,
that'll do.
Yeah. Just doing all the right things there, Todd. You know, reading Oz to your daughter, getting them into the Monkees rather than the Beatles. It's just all positives here.
My kids love the Beatles too, but we made sure to get the the season 1 set of the Monkees so we could train them right on that as well.
Yeah.
So.
And then when they get a little older, show them Head and go, yeah, this is what they were all about.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's like, you know that band you really like? This is what their true nature was. Yeah. The Beatles' acid years had nothing on what the Monkees were in the later years. It's in the Beach Boys as well.
If you think Magical Mystery Tour is weird, go get a copy of Head and then talk to me.
Nice. Anything else to discuss in this scene? You know my child stimming away. You get bored of it.
I think you hit on it pretty well. I didn't realize till I was getting ready for the show how short of a scene it is. I was like, it's only a minute long. Oh my gosh, But it's still one of my favorites.
Yeah, and it's so impactful, and I imagine it's one of those things that you go away from the labyrinth and you can sort of remember it. It's like an earworm for the eyes, an eyeworm.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I think it's also a really underrated scene in that respect, because when we think of like the iconic moments in the labyrinth, I know everybody loves the masquerade ball, and we all love Magic Dance.
Because it's the sexiest thing ever to have been on screen.
Yeah, and it's like when we get rid of those, I think Helping Hands is like the next one to go to. It's either that or the Fireys, or like Who Goes There, which for myself is like, I think the Siege of the Goblin City is like my favorite moment in the scene. And when we first started doing this podcast, Emily was like, "No, that's like one of the weakest scenes in the film."
Yeah, that's why you fast forward.
Or the Rolling Stones, as the DVD chapter calls it, because they love a pun. Great. Well, that brings us to the end of tonight's chapter. Thank you as always for listening. Todd, if people would like to come and find your wares, where's the best ways to find you?
Well, my main blog is called Forgotten Films, so that's at forgottenfilmcast.wordpress.com. I have a podcast which is called The Forgotten Filmcast. Somebody named Emily was a guest on there recently, so you can check out that episode among others. I have a second podcast which is called Walt Sent Me, which is all about the wide world of Disney movies, and by that I mean Disney under any of their umbrellas. So, like on one episode, we might be talking about a animated classic, like, Little Mermaid or something like that. And then on another episode, we might talk about something that came out under, our most recent episode is one of their Hollywood pictures release, Super Mario Brothers. Yes, it's a Disney movie, folks. So, we cover anything and everything that came out under Disney. So, yeah, search for that where you find your podcast as well. It's called Walt Sent Me.
Awesome. Links, as always, are going to be in the description below, so make sure you check that out. But thank you, Todd, for coming on and providing us some puppetry insights into such an interesting scene. I didn't realise there was so much depth to this. I just thought it was a bunch of people with their hands painted green, so I call myself educated after tonight's episode.
There was plenty of depth, 40 feet worth of depth, remember.
But no, thank you again for coming on. Thank you to my co-host Emily.
Thank you.
And we will be back next time with Emily's favourite chapter of all time, Chapter 11, The Oblique. So make sure you join us for that. But until then, good night.